So, good morning, afternoon and evening to you all. My name is Yiakoumi. I'm the Group Publisher of the Automotive Logistics Group. Automotive Logistics Live is not just about those outside of the room watching us. It's also the means by which you can ask questions, communicate with each other, communicate with the panel and the moderator, make comments, ask questions and be a part of our voting surveys. So please join us with this on Automotive Logistics Live. Firstly, you probably want the Wi-Fi. So the Wi-Fi is provided and sponsored by our gold sponsors, Sovereign. And the Wi-Fi code is 333444. So if you open a browser page, you should get straight onto the, and then enter the code, you should get onto the Wi-Fi. You'll then see some instructions on the screen or on the inside back cover of the conference program on how you can then register or log in to Automotive Logistics Live. So, it's great to be back in Bonn for the Automotive Logistics Europe Conference, this time with sunshine instead of the snow that we had last year. And perhaps, and hopefully, that reflects a little bit more positivity in the air business-wise too. And the theme this year is the exploration of value and how logistics is unlocking competitive advantage across supply chains. And the reason for that, it's a reminder to us all that logistics is not a cost. That's often what we're told. Logistics is just a cost or a waste. Logistics adds value to the global automotive industry. It's vitally important. And we should be proud of the contribution that we make to the industry to enable and support globalization, to be a leader in finding efficiencies in the industry, for hopefully leading the way to customer service and customer retention, enabling the manufacturing and whether it's nearshoring, global sourcing, single platforms, multiple platforms. All of this is only possible if logistics are doing a great job, and you guys are doing a great job. But at the conference, we try to see what we can improve, what we can do differently, how we can look forward, and some of the changes we can make. One of the additions to this conference that I think will be interesting is looking at some non-auto case studies to find out what we can learn from other industries and what other industries think of automotive. But we're also very aware that, like all conferences, this is an important networking event. I think we got off to a great start last night with the TNT-hosted cocktail reception. It was great to hear the buzz in the hall, the wonderful sound of business being done, which we all like to hear. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our sponsors, our gold sponsors, ABP, GBA, CHEP, DSV, Jeffco, Sovereign, Agility, Evolution, Geodis Wilson, Priority Freight, TNT. Our global sponsor, Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics, called the global sponsor because they sponsor all of our events around the world. Our silver sponsors, BLG Logistics, Ball Systems, SIVA, CTM Law, Evos Cargo Care, FedEx, Flexis, Goodpack, Inform, Kinaxis, Levertouch, Neovia, Orbis, Swiss Post, and UTI. They sponsor because they offer services, knowledge, people and solutions for your industry, for you guys in the room. So visit their stands, read their literature, meet their people. And also some of them, if for no other reason you should visit their stands, some of them have got some great giveaways as well, some great prizes and some great draws. Some of them that will be useful for work, some of them that will keep you fit, some of them that will make you fat. But most of all, you're a participant at Automotive Logistics Europe because you're an important decision maker in our industry. You've got a great role to play in the development, in the current, what can we do currently to change? And we want to discuss that over the next couple of years. We want to look what we can do differently. What can we learn from other industries? What can we learn from different regions? What other opportunities are there where we can find new business and new opportunities for us all? And also to look at the future. What would the future look like in 2, 5, 10 years' time? And what can we do to influence that, to make sure it goes in the right direction? So play your part in its future, and the future starts today, very much from the first session onwards. So it is, as always, an interactive conference. There will be an opportunity for questions and comments at the end of every session. In general, the presenters will make their presentations, and then once all the presentations have been made, then we'll turn to the Q&A and comments from the floor. As I said earlier, you can ask questions or make comments using Automotive Logistics Live and by keying some points or questions or comments, but preference will be given to questions from the floor. The presentations will be made available at the end of the conference as usual. They'll be sent to, a link will be sent to you where the presentations can be seen, as much as we're allowed to show some of those or share some of that information. And of course you will be able to watch the conference afterwards as well. So it's not just live to those watching us now. The sessions are recorded and you can revisit them when you're back in your offices in case you missed anything or anything that you want to write down or to share again. And please take the opportunities in the network breaks to really network and learn and meet people. It's very much, we will be talking over the next couple of days about technology and systems and so on. But like most businesses, at the end of the day, it's a people business. What makes automotive logistics as an industry great is its people and what you do and the value that you bring to automotive logistics and to the automotive industry globally. So be a part of the whole event. It's not a lecture where you sit back and listen to what the speakers have got to say. It's a whole event where you are all, every single one of you, are active participants. So the first session, we'll look a little bit at where the industry is and where it's going, including a presentation later from PwC Autofacts. But first we're going to have a presentation from the biggest car maker in Europe, to look at things to look at what perhaps should be at the top of our agenda and the view from Volkswagen. And I'm delighted to introduce the first speaker of Automotive Logistics Europe, Andrea, General Manager of Outbound Logistics from Volkswagen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrea.
So, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to Luis and his team and to everybody here that I have today the opportunity and the possibility to talk a little bit about the Group Volkswagen and about our view of the future in case of the markets and as well about the sustainable logistics in the future. As the most of you know, Volkswagen has a vision out of the strategy 2018 to become the most successful, the most fascinating and the most sustainable automotive manufacturer worldwide. And this goal, this huge goal, we want to achieve within the next 4 years. To achieve this, we are focused on 4 core points. One of them is the top customer satisfaction and quality. That means the customer has to love our cars, needs to be convinced about our cars, and also the quality needs to be in line. We want to achieve, let's say, a sales before tax of more than 8%. We want to increase our sales figures up to more than 10 million cars produced and sold by 2018. And of course, finally, we also want to be a top employer, because it is very important if you are already number 1 in Europe and you want to be, let's say, the most successful one in the next 4 years, you also need to think about to have the right people, the right employees with the right qualification aside. At the moment, we are talking about 12 brands under the roof of Volkswagen. This is the brand Volkswagen, Audi, Seat, Skoda, Bentley, Bugatti, Lamborghini, Porsche, the motorcycle company Ducati since last year, Volkswagen Commercials, Scania and MAN. You can see out of these 12 different brands that we have a very wide range of cars. We start in our entry segment and we end more or less in the light or heavy trucks and buses segment. So, and at the moment we are talking about 280 different models which we can produce. And we are also talking about a production volume per day of 34,000 cars worldwide. We have 106 factories worldwide. They are split between automotive industry, that means assembly of cars, but also engines, transmissions, and components. And in the last year, in 2013, we opened 7 plants. And as you see, 2 of them are engine plants in Silao, for example, in Mexico, and in Changchun. In Foshan, we opened a completely new plant for components. In St. Petersburg, a new company and plant for MAN trucks. And in Foshan, we started producing the new Golf, the Golf A7, which is also produced in Wolfsburg on the new MQB, Modularer Querbaukasten. I don't know how to translate this in English, so leave it like it is, MQB. In Urumqi, which is a plant in China, I think it's number 13 of our plants in China, which is more close to Europe than to our headquarters in Beijing, because the flight time from Frankfurt to Urumqi is less than 5 hours, and from Beijing to Peking to Urumqi is more than 5 hours. So they are more close to Europe. There we will produce the Santana successor. And Ningbo, where we started with the batch of the Škoda Superb. So that means in total 106 plants worldwide with a daily production outcome of 34,000 cars. Just to get a little bit more the feeling about the complexity of our processes, especially if I'm later on talking about the logistics which needs to be steered. And even then, if you want to start, let's say, a standardized approach, how to control, how to steer CO2 emissions worldwide, with different legislations, different mindsets, and so on and so on. If you have a look on the numbers of Volkswagen, and these are, let's say, the latest numbers out of 2013, how we closed the year 2013, we achieved the delivery to our customers of 9.7 million of cars. There are the Porsche is included, and also the MAN and the Scania trucks from the 1st of August last year onwards. And if you follow this graph, you see that in the last years, let's say the last 3 years, from 2010 until 2012, we made the major growth. Yeah, you see from 2005 to 2010 on top 2 million of cars, and then on a yearly base we achieved to produce and to sell 1 million of cars more in comparison to the previous year. And now we achieve 9.7 million, and as I told you at the beginning and in the introduction, our target is to produce more than 10 million. That means at the moment we are pretty close. But we still have 4 years' time to achieve it. If we now take a look on the overall global market, and this is an analysis from, let's say, our internal sources as well as external sources, and we see, the Volkswagen Group see, in 2018, the overall global automotive market by more or less 100 million of cars worldwide. That means it's a growth, a huge growth, if you compare 2011 to 2018. For example, the region North America will grow in these 7 years more or less by 29%, Western Europe by 4%, Asia Pacific more than 50%, South America more than a stable 2.5%, and rest of the world 15%. These are, let's say, minor markets which I don't want to be focused on. So that means the major growth will be in the North American region, is our expectations, and in the Asia Pacific. And within Asia Pacific, I'm not only talking about China because we are very active there, we have a lot of plants there. I'm also talking about the ASEAN markets. That means those markets like Malaysia, like Thailand, like Indonesia, which you really keep in mind. And this is at the moment also the focus of Volkswagen, to look very carefully and to analyze the situations in these markets, because there are a lot of people living there, they want to have the cars in the future, and everybody needs to be prepared. That also means, if you think about the past, everybody was talking about the BRIC countries. They are still in the focus, Brazil, Russia, India, and also China. But also the ASEAN markets will come on top. That means there will be a change or a shift from former times, from the classical triad countries to the BRIC plus ASEAN countries. I think this is our major, let's say, thinking about how we see the global automotive market for cars and light commercial vehicles for the next years. I think Mr. Gartside will then, in his presentation, have a more look in the future up to between 2018 and 2025, as far as I'm informed about. If you, let's say, think about all these actions, the global markets, 106, let's say, plants worldwide to achieve 10 million of cars production, to be the most, let's say, profitable, sustainable company worldwide, we also have to deal with global challenges, of course. Yeah? So, and one global challenge is the economy, the growth, but also the volatility of certain markets. Just to remember, Southern Europe at the moment, it's not, or in the last years, it's not doing so well in case of car sales. So at the moment, they are start to recover a little bit, but still we have to deal with growing markets and volatile markets. In case of the ecosystems, also we have to think about renewable energies, but also to think about the stability of these sources. Which is the right one? Do we have enough? And if is it stable? The climate change is a major issue. Yeah, and here the trend or the discussion internally of the group Volkswagen is how we can support to stop this climate change. What we can do to support all the actions, all the legislations taken place to support that the climate change is not going forward like a domino effect. In case of the energy, I already mentioned in case of renewable energy, also to think about which is the right fuel, which is the right engines, and also the diesel technologies. But also to think about, will we have the exact quality, the same quality everywhere where our cars are driven by customers? And will we be able to supply these quality of energies everywhere? That means also, is the infrastructure ready for this? What we need to do to prepare and to support that? And of course, the last, and I think the major issue is the demography, the changes in the mindset, the people becoming more older. They have different, let's say, approaches in driving a car. We are looking for new markets, like I mentioned, the ASEAN markets. This gives a little bit of dynamic, and we need to be there as soon as possible with the cars. That means also the development, the life cycle and the development cycle of cars needs to be speeded up, needs to be shortened, much more than in the past. Out of our group strategy to be the most successful company in the world, we also defined a group environmental strategy. As you know, 2 years ago, our board member, Dr. Winterkorn, announced on the Geneva motor session that Volkswagen will reduce its CO2 emissions by 25% until 2018, based on 2010 until 2018. So this is really a huge challenge for us, and we decided also to define out of this group strategy, the vision of the group, also a strategy for the environmental issues on the group Volkswagen. Yeah, and the environmental strategy of the group Volkswagen means that Volkswagen intends in the next years to be the most environmental friendly automotive company by 2018. And following the same systematics like on the group level, we also have here 4 fields of actions where we want to support this strategy. The first one is the mobility, to think about mobility, to define mobility, what we want to do in case of mobility. To think about resources, that means here resources for alternative energies. To think about the products, what we need to do in case of the development, the progress of our products. And of course also to think about the workforce and the organization, because without our people we can do nothing. If you take a comparison about the group target of minus 25% until 2018, in comparison to what are the targets in the European Union, they are talking about 20% in 30 years, And in Germany, we are talking about 40% in 40 years. So there you see how ambitious the target of the Group Volkswagen is, because this means by year a reduction of emissions of more than 3.5, 3.6%. And this not only means that we are focused on developing new cars with new, let's say, alternative engines or transmissions to use renewable energies. This also means a reduction within our processes, in the plant logistics, in the production, even in purchasing, or even in outbound. That means we are focused on the complete supply chain. To, let's say, go a little bit more deeper in detail and to really try to track this, we also decided a modular structure where each, let's say, process partner within our responsibilities within the group has its target and needs to fulfill with KPIs his measures. That means we have the corporate modular, we have the product planning and development module, suppliers means purchasing, logistics, production, sales and marketing, and recycling, of course, after lifetime. And especially if you're looking or thinking about the logistics module, and the logistics is within this international targeting and scales, it is in the scope 3. That means we only influence really a minor part of the emissions. It's, if you're talking about a lifetime or life cycle of a car, we can influence with logistics 1% of all the emissions within a life cycle of a car. Yeah, the major emissions are coming out of the, let's say, using of the car in the daily business with the customers. Yeah, so our influence in scope 3 is really little, but nevertheless, we also have to fulfill a target of minus 25%, but we not only focus on CO2, we only look for SO2, NOx, and all the other things. I would like to share with you some ideas about the challenges out of the module product planning and development, and here especially to have a look on the electromobility of the cars, because this is one issue where we, let's say, are analyzing and developing at the moment a lot of different systematics, and we need to define or to create a systematic and corporate approach to fulfill these. We have to think about the powertrains. Yeah, there are different ways. We have the Volkswagen e-Ups, we have the Audi e-trons, but we also have hybrid cars. We also need to think about the energies, as I mentioned in the beginning, which will be the right one and which will be the right net for that. We have also to develop new components in case of engines, but as well also in case of batteries. We need to think about how we can integrate those cars with those electric cars in the infrastructures. Do we have a common infrastructure for that? Do we have a common plug? This is the first question. If you think about not only Volkswagen as a group, but if you also think about other OEMs. Everybody is developing electronic cars, yeah, but most of them have different plugs. So the question is how we can unify, how we can define together to have this integration as easy as possible. Also, we have to think about how we can use mobile online services, like everybody of us is having iPads and iPhones, to think about, can we use this technology, for example, to recharge our electronic cars overnight? Is this a way, is this a potential to go? And at least also to think about mobility concepts. It already started some years ago that some bigger cities in Germany, like Stuttgart, like Munich, it's not allowed to go within the cities on the daily time with big trucks. You need to, let's say, shuttle with smaller trucks. So I think, in our point of view of Volkswagen, is that this will be much more in the future. And we need to think about mobility concepts for our customers that they can go downtown. For example, that they come with their cars, with their electric, with their normal cars to a station on the suburbs of a city, and then use small electric cars on a car sharing business or however to go downtown, leave it there and go back. Yeah? So that means a completely different way of thinking about mobility, and also what is the expectation, what our customers want in case of mobility, what they're expecting from us. And this are just, let's say, 6 points where we analyzing and try to develop and find solutions for out of the module product planning and development. If we look to the module of logistics, we, let's say, implemented 3 pillars, or a house with 3 pillars or 3 different segments where we are focused on to support the reduction of emissions. The first of one is, of course, the balancing and the transparency. First of all, we need to know how much emissions we have, yeah, and what we can do, how we track them. And this is not as easy as you can imagine if you want to do this for 106 plants worldwide. Of course, we cannot start with all at the same time, so we divided this in different steps, but nevertheless, the same methodology, the same standards at the end will be implemented worldwide. The next one is to develop measures. That means to think about concepts, to think about how we can improve. It's the first step, how we can do to improve, not to invent the wheel a second time, just to start with thinking about optimizations, improvements, and what we can develop together with our suppliers and also service providers. And the third one is also a very important one, I mentioned in the beginning already, is the coaching and communications to our employees. They need to be aware what it means if we are talking about reduction of 25% of emissions. In the past, logistics was always focused on reduction of lead times, reduction of costs, improvement of quality within the processes, and since 2 years ago, also we are focused on CO2 emissions to improve that. But we also identified that in the future, also legislations will have influences on our processes, on our concepts. And one, for example, is, which really hits us from January 2015 onwards, are the SECA zones in the North and Baltic Sea. It's only in the North and the Baltic. It's not in the Med. It's only North and Baltic Sea. So, of course, everybody of us wants to reduce the sulfur in the shipping. But on the other side is what we are doing now. Of course, we can stop any shipments, but I think this will not be the solutions. So the shipping companies are looking for alternatives, rubber technologies, or LNG. But if, for example, you think about why not use the LNG, but then you have, let's say, another serious problem that the infrastructure in the German ports and also in the European ports is not there. You don't have enough infrastructure and you don't have enough terminals where you can tank LNG, where you can use it, where you can get it from. So, and therefore, it's the one side that we say, okay, of course we will support legislations, yeah, to reduce emissions, but on the other side, on the political way, there also needs to be a support. Because finally, at the end, for us, as Volkswagen, as an OEM, was this, let's say, SECA regulation starting or be valid from 1st of January 2015 onwards, our costs will increase. This is a fact, because we can do nothing. So, but the question is now how we can work together, also with politics, to improve the infrastructures, because at the moment for these technologies or these techniques as an alternative for sulfur or to reduce sulfur, our infrastructure is underdeveloped. Volkswagen, the Volkswagen Group, is the first OEM, the first German OEM, let's say, that joined the clean shipping network at the end of this last year. And we did this, of course, for, first of all, to be partner, to support, and also to have proactively influence on the calculations and on the ways how emissions will occur. Yeah, and we think that this is the right way also to show that we are aware and that we want to contribute to reduce the emissions. The Volkswagen Group also uses, since 2 years, alternative or renewable energies in their logistics transportation. And this is an example which we are doing together with the Deutsche Bundesbahn. That means we are using trains for outbound, that means FPU transportation, as well as inbound material logistics between several plants with renewable energy, yeah, to reduce the emissions from the Volkswagen Group side. and we achieved savings of 10,000 tons CO2 per year. And these trains are used from Ingolstadt and Neckarsulm, the Audi plants in the south of Germany, to the port of Emden with FBUs. And in case of the inbound logistics, we're using it between Zwickau and Wolfsburg material trains. Yeah? They are round trips. Another example from the logistics point of view where we try to optimize, where we try to reduce emissions but also waste and lead times is our new logistics concept, where we implemented, in case of the inbound, that means the material transportation, cross-dock, milk runs or direct relations. That means we split our network in different trends and different scenarios. That, for example, suppliers which are close by to our plants can go on a direct way or on a milk run way to the plant. Suppliers which are a little bit more far away, they deliver their parts, their own parts, like a single call-off from our side, because we are steering the process to the first cross-dock. It's called the supplier close cross-dock, and from that we define and we combine the trips to the factory's cross-dock, and then finally it's delivered up to the line. And this is a new, let's say, concept where we were able to reduce the cost, where we were able to reduce lead times, to eliminate waste, and also to increase the utilization of our trucks or trains, even what you are talking about. On the other side, but this is out of the daily business, and I'm sure most of you out of the service providers business also are dealing with that, to do an optimization of packaging of containers or the loading, the utilization of the trucks. These are some examples from our side, how we try to increase the density of our packaging, and also to think about, let's say, intelligent concepts if we have to transport SKD cars, for example, from Europe to Malaysia, for example, to assemble them. But this is an ongoing process out of our daily business. Another quite new way to, let's say, reduce CO2, but also to define some green actions, is the consolidation of different logistics functions in the multimodal logistic park in Wolfsburg. This is, let's say, like a supplier park, or not really a supplier park. You have a packing station there, you have a yard for cars, and you have a port there. Yeah. So, and this is three functions together. And we started with the yard to optimize our network in case of the transportation of the cars, to reduce it, and therefore to reduce the distance, and therefore also to reduce, of course, the emissions. Then we built up a brand new packaging station to pack here. We are packing parts for our overseas companies, and there we also take in place, let's say, that we increase the energy efficiency, that we use the LED lightings, that we have rainwater utilization, special constructions, and so on and so on. So that really to show in our new buildings, new logistics buildings, that we are able to build on an energy efficient way. And the last one is the inland port at the Mittellandkanal. This one is near Fallersleben. It's near the factory, 5 kilometers far away from the Wolfsburg factory. And here we have also the possibility for three-modal transportation. We have the train, we have the trucks, and also the waterways. And here we started, first of all, with container transportation on the vessels on the Mittellandkanal to Hamburg and to Bremerhaven for our overseas companies. And in a second step, we are also right now analyzing if this is possible to use also for cars, FPUs, to Emden, not to Hamburg, but to Emden, because there we have, out of our point of view, we can gain the most volumes out of a round trip. Because, as you know, Emden is one of our major import and export port in Germany. We receive a lot of cars, FPUs from overseas for the European distribution, and so we can combine it with Wolfsburg production for overseas, go to Emden, we are these small vessels, and then also take back import cars from overseas to the Wolfsburg area. The last issue out of our three pillars is the coaching and the qualification of the people, of our employees. And there we designed a concept which is split into two phases. In phase one, we, let's say, have a qualification concept implemented. Let's say that the people are more sensitive against CO2, what they can do, with small workshops, also to ask them for ideas how we can reduce energies. And the second phase is then the qualification, which is, let's say, tailor-made according their functions they are doing. Yeah. So, and this is a two phases concept, and this is not only, let's say, implemented or started in the logistics. We are doing this together with all the other colleagues out of the modules for purchasing, for development and planning, and even for energies. To look a little bit, let's say, in the next years, we also think about how we can using, we call it state-of-the-art technology to, let's say, to steer, to reduce emissions. First of all, there are the driver assistance systems. All of us know about the lane assistance, the automatic cruise controls. All these systems, assistance systems can be used also in the future in case of inbound or outbound flows, to reduce emissions. Also to think about the dynamic traffic regulations, to have intelligent infrastructure around in advance of the plants to avoid traffic jams, and of course also to have an optimization of the traffic in the plants. Imagine in Wolfsburg we are producing on a daily basis roughly 3,800 cars. A lot of trucks are going in and out. So also to think about to use app technologies, different other technologies, to have a pre-warning if something happens, exceptions. And of course also to have the CO2 controlling visible, transparent. Just to press a button and then you have the numbers. Not as we are doing now. In the moment we are calculating and adding everything and try to divide it and so on and so on. At the moment it's a little bit more complicated, but we are very optimistic that in the future with using state-of-the-art technology, we will also achieve to have that on a pressing button base. Now I would like to come to our partners, to our service providers and also to our suppliers. We as Volkswagen, we are doing a lot, and also we know that our service providers are doing a lot in case of reducing emissions, to optimize the processes. And we have to continue to work together in case of the three sectors of our modes of transportation. That means we have to think about to go further on in case of the vessels, in case of rail transportation, and in case of truck transportations. And one example can be, for example, to think about to think about round table discussions. We are doing this in the next weeks with some suppliers and partners to think about what we can do together. Because everybody is doing something, and to share this, to improve this, try to find, let's say, the same elements to continue to standardize, because at the end I think it's also very important for our service provider side that not each OEM has its own solution. There needs to be the most common one for everybody. So, and if you look a little bit more closer in detail, what could be the various strategies to reduce emissions? For example, in case of the vessels, in case of the shippings, they are talking about new propeller optimizations. They are talking about LNG, to use LNG in the future. In case of the trains, also the aerodynamics, but also the retrofit of railway wagons to optimize the load factors, for example, is one issue. And in case of the trucks, and they were very close together with the various strategies, because we also have our own assets like MAN and Scania, and they are on the way also to think about light construction of cars, about tire pressure reductions, about using assistance systems, telematic systems, GPN systems. Also that means all these already onboard systematic and telematic, in the future to optimize and to reduce the emissions much more. We think we showed a bright bunch of examples and aspects how we are thinking, how we are approaching from the Volkswagen side, from the group Volkswagen side, the issue to reduce the emissions, to fulfill our target of CO2 reduction by 25% until 2018. So that means we are on a good way as well as you are on a good way. But we also think that this will not be enough. And therefore, again, we would like to intensify the sharing of knowledge, the combining of resources, and also to share the awareness and to be open-minded for new topics together with you. Because we think the world, we only have the only one, and it belongs to all of us, and therefore we have to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Eck. A great opener for the conference. It covered a lot of things, the challenges that are facing global automotive logistics, and focusing especially on the green challenges and the environment, a very important issue that has to be at the top of our agenda despite all the other pressures that are on our industry. And next up, to give us an overview and a forecast and a look at where the industry is and where it might be going, I'd like to welcome to the podium Michael Gartside, the Senior Automotive Analyst from PwC Autofacts. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Louis. Thank you for inviting me here this morning. I'd like to take 10 or 20 minutes just to speak about, as Louis said, the state of the global automotive industry. I'll touch briefly upon that and then look in more detail at the state of the European industry and also looking a bit about the development of trade and logistics. Then take a slightly longer term, very brief outlook. Normally we forecast up to 2020. I've been asked to look what the situation might be in 10 years' time. So we'll just have a couple of slides to look at that situation also. This shows an overview of our global light vehicle assembly forecast. So in 2013, about just over 82 million units, light vehicles up to 6 tons were produced globally. We expect that to increase by about 25 million units by 2020. So a pretty significant increase from this point. It's driven by, to varying degrees, most countries or regions within the world. Perhaps the one exception to that is Japan. Japan's facing a number of significant hurdles to its global or to its market, to its demand situation within its market, and also from a production perspective. The population in Japan is aging and declining, and consumer interest of cars is falling also. So the Japanese market has fallen by about 2 million units from its peak 10 years ago. From a production perspective as well, the Japanese manufacturers have faced significant challenges. They saw a large appreciation of the yen. Okay, that has now reversed to an extent. But nevertheless, a lot of the globalization of the Japanese OEMs is taking place in the growth markets, and they're no longer exporting to such a degree from Japan. Most of the other countries are looking at reasonable growth. If we look at the US, that's recovered very, very significantly from the position it was in 2009 after the collapse. We expect further growth in the US, but albeit at a slower rate. It was mentioned by Farag that the ASEAN markets are very important markets, and they are. Indonesia, I believe, is the 4th largest country in the world. Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, the Philippines, they're all significant potential growth markets from a vehicle demand perspective. At the moment, they're dominated by the Japanese manufacturers, but as we've heard, there is growing interest by the European manufacturers. There is growing investment in those markets. India has been a bit of a problem. It was seen perhaps 5 or 10 years ago as following in China's footsteps. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. The Indian market and the economy have stagnated for a number of years now, and we've had to revise significantly our forecasts, certainly over the mid to long term, for India down. We now believe that because of the structural constraints within India and other issues, we're not going to see the sort of growth potential people talked about until well into the next decade now. So within that region, of course, China is the big one. It continues to drive growth, it continues to dominate the market, and we expect to see further significant growth within China. An interesting one is the EU. It's been through 5-6 years of a very tough time. Certainly from a demand perspective, the market has fallen significantly, and we'll see that in a bit more detail soon. From a production perspective, it's fared somewhat better. But going forwards, we expect that production situation to improve further, based upon a recovery of demand to an extent within Europe, but also localization of production that's taking place here. So it might come as a surprise to some of you, but the EU is going to be one of the biggest growth regions we forecast over the mid to long term. Turning now to look at the EU situation in more detail. Well, from an economic perspective, I'm sure you're all well aware, we've had financial crisis followed by recession, followed by financial crisis, followed by recession. It's been 5-6 years of very, very tough time, certainly for most economies and certainly for the core debt crisis countries, particularly in Southern Europe. As we move into this year, then we are starting to see economic recovery, albeit in many cases relatively low. A lot of countries are still saddled with very high levels of sovereign debt. They're still having to impose significant austerity measures. They still have sustained high levels of unemployment. All these factors are going to constrain the strength of the recovery of vehicle demand over the short term. But nevertheless, there are positive things being seen. If we look at economic sentiment, which is something that we monitor to try to get an indication of the short-term changes, that bottomed out in many of the European main markets in about late 2012 and started to slowly recover after that. From about, I think, Q2 2013, we started to see economic recovery in some countries, and that continued through the rest of the year. The sentiment picked up more strongly from the second half of last year, and that's when we started to see a recovery in vehicle demand in many markets. And as you can see, it's continued to pick up and in some countries intensify in recent months. And as you probably all know, the European market has got off to a reasonably good start in the first 2 months of this year. Okay, it's compared with a weak Q1 last year, but nevertheless, it's a positive development. This puts the demand situation into context for a number of countries or country groupings. As you can see, most of the countries in Europe are at or past the lowest level they've been in 20 years. One of the exceptions to that is the UK. The UK, I think in February, so last month, recorded its 24th consecutive month of growth. It's now at a 2.5–3 million market, not far off the peak levels of demand seen in the mid-part of the last decade. But the UK is one of the few exceptions. If we look at the other main European markets, they've fared somewhat worse. Even Germany, which has fared reasonably well from an economic perspective, has low levels of unemployment, is not far off the lowest levels of demand seen in 20 years. It had a reasonably positive start to the year, and we're forecasting a plus 3 million market, but nevertheless, that's still pretty weak compared to the norm, which is around about 3.2 to 3.5 million. France is struggling at the moment, and France is probably one of the key risks that we see this year and next year from both an economic perspective and a vehicle demand perspective. Italy. The Italian market last year fell to just 1.3 million units, the lowest level seen since the late 1970s. So it's lost 35 years of growth. We do expect Italy to start recovering. It's facing significant economic and political challenges, but I think the market has gone as low as it's likely to go. It started to recover in the first 2 months, and order intake in February was actually quite strong. So we are forecasting a reasonable recovery in Italy, albeit from a low base. And of course the GIPS markets, Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Spain. These have all been hit very hard to varying degrees and to varying times. But again, all of them are now seeing some recovery. Spain is being helped by the fourth PVA scrappage scheme that's been implemented, but also probably by a slow turnaround of the economy. Portugal is actually recovering very strongly now from a vehicle demand perspective, and economically it's doing better than many of its peers. The market started to recover in the second quarter of last year and is up around about 25% in the first 2 months of this year. So there are some positives within the European picture. It's going to be a very varied picture because there are so many countries and so many different factors at play and so many different recovery rates and so many different levels of unemployment. But we do see recovery at the overall European level. This shows EU and EFTA total new car demand and how it's evolved since the 2007 peak year of 16 million units. As you can see, we had 6 consecutive years of drops, so that by 2013 the market was 3.7 million below what it had been in 2016. As I mentioned, we are now starting to see recovery, and we do forecast about 3.5% growth within the region this year. There is potentially more upside than downside to that figure. We are seeing a stronger bounce back in some markets than perhaps we expected 6 months ago. As I mentioned, France is possibly the biggest risk at the moment, and also the UK. It's unlikely the UK can continue to grow at the rates it's seen for the past 2 years. It was well ahead of where it should be from an economic perspective, and the demand was probably partly pushed there by big cash windfalls that consumers had from insurance mis-selling payouts. So a lot of consumers received quite large cash payments over the last 2 years, and it's been suggested or believed that those consumers are using that to help purchase new cars. Longer term though, although we see consistent recovery over the rest of the decade, we don't see the European market returning to the sort of peak that we saw in 2007. And there's a number of reasons for that. Of course, the European demographics, generally the European population is stagnating and ageing. So that's going to be a negative influence. Over the past 5 years of recession and financial crisis, people have got used to holding on to their cars for longer. Cars are more reliable, and people can do so. There's no need to change a car every 3 or 4 years now, and if people have got used to changing their car 5, 6, 7 years now, are they likely to move back to the old model? They may renew them more frequently, but possibly less frequently than before. So that's a further negative influence. And of course, the falling influence of younger consumers. We're seeing it more and more. Social media is having a big impact. A lot of young people of 18, 19, they're not bothered about getting their driving licenses. They're not interested in getting a car. Some people cite the cost of doing so. And certainly within a recession, when finances are tight, that's a valid reason. Some people cite ecological reasons. They're environmentally conscious. They're not interested in getting a car. Some people cite the fact that they can't do so at the moment, but they would like to later. But definitely there is a change happening. If you look at driving licence issuance statistics in Germany, in Italy, in the UK, you saw massive declines in young people getting new licences through the crisis. Some of that, no doubt, was due to the cost of getting a licence and the fact they simply couldn't afford to do so. But some of that was also, no doubt, due to some of these consumers are just not going to get licences, they're not interested. And this is a real risk for the longer term for the industry. Ultimately, we don't believe that 16 million will ever be achieved again in the European market. Looking at our assembly forecast. So this shows assembly, spare capacity and utilisation over the recent history and forecast period. As you all know, the industry has suffered from underutilisation over the last few years. It's been a real issue with capacity utilisation at some plants falling to 50 or even 40%. Manufacturers are responding to that through a number of measures. Of course, we've seen another number of high-profile plant closures, and we're going to see some more this year. We've seen the closure, or we're going to see the closure of the Genk plant in Belgium. We saw the closure of the Aulnay plant in France. We're going to see the closure of the GM plant in Bochum. These moves are taking out about 650,000 units of capacity. But in addition, manufacturers are bringing vehicles into Europe to try to help address the capacity utilisation situation as well. So with the next generation Fiat 500 due later in 2015, whilst at the moment they're producing it in Mexico and Tychy in Poland, they're going to sole source that from Tychy in Poland. Suzuki, trying to improve the utilisation of their Hungary plant, they're introducing an additional incremental vehicle from 2016, and they're also starting to export more of the product from that plant, not just to Europe, but outside Europe. Jaguar Land Rover has been one of the success stories of the past 4 or 5 years, and they're heavily investing in product. They'll be introducing a range of new products at the expanded Solihull plant, 2 Jaguars and a Land Rover. Over 50% of their production, well over 50%, is exported outside Europe, and therefore that's a positive development. One interesting development is the Nissan Micra. At the moment it's produced and exported from India, but from 2016 and the next generation it's going to be built for the European market in France. So these developments, combined with what we see as increasing demand within the European context, should start to push up utilisation quite significantly over the medium term. And by about 2017, we're expecting capacity utilisation to be around about 85%, which is an acceptable level within the industry, not the sub 70% that we're seeing at the moment in many cases. So how do things look from a trade perspective? Well, in 2009, the situation was pretty dire. Demand was collapsing, production was collapsing. But quite quickly, some markets started to recover, unlike Europe. So you see a rapid bounce back of North America, quite strong recovery in the Russian market, strong recovery in the Turkish market. These are 3 of the top 5 trading partners with Europe from a cars perspective. And of course, you saw very strong continued growth of China. This had a large positive impact on trade flows out of the EU. As a result of that, between 2009 and 2012, exports of vehicles grew by almost 3 million units. At the same time, imports fell by 230,000 units. Looking at the picture slightly differently, this shows our light vehicle assembly forecast in the middle, our sales forecast, the bottom dotted line, and then the difference between the 2 figures. So in effect, the surplus, the black line, which is on the right-hand scale. With the collapse in the market in 2009 and the collapse in production, Europe actually became a negative, moved into a negative situation. Historically, it's always been a small negative export, a net exporter of products, vehicle products. But in 2009, production was over 1 million units less than demand, partly as scrappage schemes started incentivising smaller cars, and a lot of those smaller cars were imported. However, with the recovery in export growth, with the recovery in the major markets, China, the US, Turkey, Russia and such like, we saw quite a strong recovery in production. And so Europe moved into surplus production over demand. And this has continued, so that by 2013 there were 2 million units more vehicles produced than were sold in Europe. We expect this to continue, albeit at a slower pace, until perhaps peaking in 2016. At that point, a lot of the localisation will have started to take place, but then we'll start seeing increased localisation of products in other locations. So the Audi Q5 is going to be built in Mexico rather than Ingolstadt. VW Golf is now started to be built in North America for the North American and South American markets. So we're seeing developments such as that. The Mercedes C-Class is going to be starting production in North America this year. So there are developments, increasing localization within those markets, within China, within Russia, that should slow and possibly reduce that surplus level. However, we still believe that Europe is going to be a significant net exporter. It's just that that surplus could decline over time. So how does sort of globalization evolve? This is a very sort of basic or brief EU viewpoint. As the emerging markets start to develop, then exports to those markets increase, partly of complete built-up units, but also manufacturers start to invest in assembly facilities there, so exports of kits. As the markets develop, then as critical mass is achieved, some of those assembly plants move to full production plants, but we're still seeing significant exports of major components, engines and transmissions. Then we move to the next phase. and those markets mature and develop even more. And the growth of production within those markets supports the growth of investment in engine plants and transmission plants. And we're seeing that very much with VW. They're one of the leading proponents of investing. We're seeing significant investment of engine and transmission plants in China, in Russia, and in Mexico by the VW group, as they start to supply more and more components for the products they sell in those markets from those markets. And then we move on to the next flow change. As those markets develop, and possibly as capacity exceeds demand, we could start to see exports from those markets to neighbouring markets, or even possibly back to the original source markets. We're seeing that to an extent with India at the moment. I mentioned earlier, the Indian market hasn't developed in the way that a lot of manufacturers expected. There's an excess of capacity there, and they're having to do something with that and change their strategies. So we're now seeing a number of OEMs increasingly using India as an export base. Okay, I cited an example earlier of Renault, actually, or Nissan, moving the Micra from India to France. That's an exception. That's an unusual situation. A lot of manufacturers, Ford is one example, are exporting increasing amounts from India. So just to turn very briefly and look at the longer term outlook. As I mentioned, we normally forecast up to 2020, but we'll just sort of look at what could happen or start to happen mid next decade. We see globally 5 potential megatrends that are driving all industries, and certainly the automotive and logistics industry. One of those is demographic shifts. The global population is aging. I mentioned that there's significant demographic shifts happening in Europe. It's happening globally. At the moment, or in 2010, around about 10% of the global population was aged over 60. By 2050, it's estimated that 21% of the global population will be aged over 60. This could have a significant impact on the global automotive industry and demand. We're also seeing a shift in economic power. At the moment, the G7 economies are quite a bit bigger than the E7 economies, but very soon the E7 are going to overtake the G7, and by 2050 will be massively larger economies. Also, urbanisation continues to accelerate. At the moment, around about 50% of the world's population is in urban areas. By 2030, about 60% of the population will be in urban areas. This clearly is going to cause huge problems. Congestion and pollution are very big and very real issues in many global urban areas at the moment, particularly within Asia and Central and South America. This increase in urbanisation is only going to exaggerate the problem, and it could be a hindrance towards future demand growth. Of course, climate change is a big issue, and also resource scarcity. The automotive industry is a heavy resource user. The use of cars is using resources, finite resources. The growth of demand, growth of production is going to increase, ultimately, the cost of these resources. This is going to have a big impact. And of course, technological breakthrough. We've seen very, very rapid and increasingly rapid changes in technology over the past 10, past 5, past few years. Things are happening all the time. The development of social media is changing people's social relationships. It's changing people's transportation patterns. So this could have a potential issue as well. So what could it all mean? Some people are now suggesting that we're coming towards a global peak level of demand and production within the global automotive industry. Our base forecast is the middle red line there. We're currently looking at around about 108 million units of light vehicles being produced by 2020. There is an upside to that if India starts to develop more rapidly, if China, we're being too conservative on China, if other things develop more positively. But nevertheless, that's our sort of current baseline. Does that represent the peak level, the highest level of demand and production that we're going to see? Well, there is one scenario that things continue to grow. India is a big uncertainty. If the Indian market starts to show its potential, then yes, we could start to see continued growth after that point. A lot of people feel that China has a lot more room to grow once it gets to 30 million units. So that's a positive. And of course, with increasing emissions legislation, that could start to take older vehicles off the road and it could help to ease the congestion issues that we see in some of the major urban areas. Alternatively, after 10 years of consistent and relatively strong growth, we could see some of these megatrends starting to combine with economic factors, and we could perhaps see a pause in growth, a dip. Or the downside scenario is that these megatrends do really start to have an impact over the next 10 years, combined with the potential for an economic slowdown after the growth that we've seen and we'd like to see over the coming decade. Then this could have a more significant and more sustainable impact on demand. And that scenario really would have catastrophic impact on the global automotive industry and the logistics industry. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Right, two great presentations there. Following Mrs. Eck, a wonderful one from Michael Gartside, giving us different scenarios for the growth of the industry that we all work in. Some growth, some not so positive. Interesting to hear that Europe's on a positive way up. But plenty of information shared over the last two presentations that I'm sure will spark off your interest. So what we'd like now is to open it up to the floor. You can use the Automotive Logistics Live to post comments or to ask questions, but priority will be given to questions from the floor. If you've got a question or a comment, what you should do is raise your hand, wait for the microphone to come so that we can all hear you clearly, then say your name and your company name, and then make your comment or ask your question. So because there's not so much time left, I'll throw it out to the audience first. If anyone wants to ask a question or make a comment. No, not yet. So I'll ask a question to Michael first, and then maybe get a comment from Mrs. Eck. I never saw so much about Russia. So I suppose maybe that's because it's too easy to forecast, and you didn't need to mention so much. But it's firstly just if we can touch on Russia as much as you can, a little bit, and also kind of second guessing you a little bit. I don't think it's going to be as positive as we'd like. Likewise, what you said about about India as well. How much behind do you think those markets will be? Will they even in the middle term reach the goals that were set before, or the targets that we expected? And what will be the impact of that on global automotive industry? So.
Interesting question. Russia is sort of, although it's grouped within the BRIC markets, Brazil, Russia, India, China, it's actually very different to the other BRIC markets insofar as it's got a stagnating, in fact, a declining population, so it's got significant demographic hurdles it's facing. From that perspective, Russia has probably a demand ceiling. Some people talk about 5 million units. We don't see Russia ever exceeding 4 million units, and possibly even lower than that. So, and there are very sort of real reasons for that. There's been a lot of investment in Russia, understandably, because it was a growth market, and it still does have growth potential. But it's possible that the investment there is exceeding the long-term demand potential, and that we will start to see increasing exports from Russia as manufacturers seek to utilise the spare capacity they might have there. So I think that's a sort of how we see the Russian situation. It started to face a few problems last year. The market was down, production I think was stagnant, was flat. Of course, this year, again, the outlook is marginally negative, but of course with the sort of the recent Ukraine crisis, that could put a further negative influence on the market for the short term. So Basically, Russia faces some hurdles. There is potential growth there, but possibly not as much as some people see.
Okay. Well, I'll stick to that point first. Mrs. Eck, have you got anything to add on Russia? Have you changed your plans, or Volkswagen changed their plans for Russia in any way?
No, we will not change our plans in Russia. As you know, we have one company there in Kaluga, the Volkswagen company, and then we also use Nizhny Novgorod, the gas factory, to assembly our cars there. So we continue on that way, because one of the philosophy of Volkswagen also is to be as close as much possible to the customer. So, and therefore we decided to go with one own plant and with one, let's say, used plant into this country, and we will continue that. Mm-hmm. Of course, we cannot produce all the cars needed in Russia in those two plants. So there we also have a number of cars which go for import from Europe, or mainly from Germany, into Russia.
Okay, thank you. And to Michael, kind of part two of that question was, if you think two important markets, India and Russia, are not going to reach the targets, definitely in the kind of near to middle term, what do you think the impact will be on those, on the automotive industry in those regions?
I mean, we're talking about sort of, relatively small differences. So, I mean, with the Russian situation, while demand within the market might not achieve perhaps the level some people are talking about, the peripheral countries or neighbouring countries are seeing significant growth, and there's not necessarily that much assembly output in those countries. So there is export potential from Russia to countries such as Kazakhstan, which grew very strongly last year, and other neighbouring countries. And likewise with India, we are seeing manufacturers start to export from there. And India will grow. It will become a much bigger market. The question I think everyone wants to know is when that will start happening and to what extent it will grow.
Okay, thank you. A question firstly on this side at the front, and then we'll go into the middle. If you can say your name and your company name, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Björn Svenningsen, representing UECC. It is not a question, it's more a comment, and I would like to thank Mrs. Eck for taking the leadership, stepping up and putting SECA on the agenda, the sulfur emission control area, which is a major concern and challenge for our industry. So thank you very much for putting that on the agenda.
Okay,
welcome.
Thank you. There was a question further along in the same row. Put on a bit of weight, Gavin, have we?
Good morning. Frank Ritz, APL Logistics. Andrea, that was a very interesting, comprehensive account of the environment issues that VW's tackling. Can I ask, many years ago, I can remember paint shops that the Rover Group, God forbid, now BMW, Cowley plant, there was a lot of concern about paint shop emissions. Now, we only see CO2 as being a headline thing. What about all the other things that car manufacturing produces? Is everything now just CO2, or are there a whole host of other indices and contaminants and destroyers of the environment that don't get the headlines but are being looked at?
Of course, we are focused on everything, not only on the CO2. We're also looking for the NOx, for the SO2. We're also focused on how we can reduce water, what we can do in case of loudness, to avoid to be too loud, especially if you have some movements during the night. So that at the end, we are focused on the complete bunch of emissions which we try to influence to reduce. It's not only the major goal to reduce the CO2, it's everything.
Are you actually doing apples and oranges translations? I mean, in terms of so many tons of, let's say, fluorocarbons equates to so many tons of CO2, or what?
Of course, we try to measure that. Let's say in the last 2 years, we try to, define the base, the calculation base for all our measures. Yeah, that means if you think about our worldwide network with 106 companies, the different scopes, the different ways of how the processes are defined worldwide, because we don't have everywhere the same standard. Yeah, so we first need to have the base, really a clear base to know about what we are talking about. And then to try to make small slices, yeah, and then to calculate the CO2, the SOx, the NOx out of this. So, and this is not very easy. It's really a challenge, and it's really also very ambitious for us, let's say, to fulfill these targets until 2018, to reduce everything by 25%. I'm really very open to that. But it's necessary, first to have the transparency, and then you can decide where you want to go to influence. Yeah? And first we need to understand the whole system. And in case of logistics, we are one small part within the complete system. As I said, we are 1% of the emissions over life cycle of a car. Yeah, there are much more impact in case of the production, yeah, in case, like we mentioned, assembly lines, paint shops, body shops, yeah, there are also emissions out of that. So, and we try to reduce everything. It's not only a target to logistics or to the development for cars, it's to everybody in the Volkswagen Group.
Okay, thank you. A question from here first, and then from here first. Gav? And then we'll have the final question from the back there.
Hello, my name is Carl Lucas from Magna. I would like to ask a question to Mrs. Eck. Will probably the sustainability are influencing in the future your sourcing decisions?
Very good question. Let's say the sourcing is, let's say, driven by cost, quality, and volumes. Yeah, and of course, in the future, also the CO2 or emissions, let's call it generic, the emissions, will have an impact on the sourcing. But if you see how we, let's say, expand within the Volkswagen Group with the 106 companies worldwide, we don't source all the parts from Germany, for example, for our plants in China. We already source locally. That means with each new plant or with each new assembly line, we also define a certain percentage of local content based on the economical and ecological base. So on this we will continue.
Because I'm dealing very often with OEMs and with purchasing there, and I never got the question, could you show us please your greenhouse emission balance or something like that? So not yet. Yeah.
Well, of course, in the future, in our tenders, there also will be the question inside. No? That we want to have the transparency from your side. If we want, as an OEM, if you want to, let's have the transparency within our complete supply chain, we also need to ask you. Because the suppliers, you have your pre-suppliers. So, and if you want to calculate the complete chain, we need to know from your side, your emissions. Because we only start from, let's say, your plant to our plant, the inbound. But we have no information about, let's say, all your pre-sourcing activities. Where the parts are coming from, where the sources are, and so on and so on. And therefore, in the future, yes, there will be also a question about your transparency of the emissions.
Okay, thank you very much. But just one comment to your answer now. Most of the, based on your platform strategy, most of the parts are carryover parts and the suppliers are sourced directly by the OEMs.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And then the final question at the back there, please.
Hi, it's Mark Hindley from Paragon. Just wanted to ask both panelists, really, whether they feel the dynamic in car production is going to be more towards small cars or luxury cars or mid-range cars, or, you know, where's that growth that the 40 million extra cars is going to come from?
Well, let's say there is a trend since years to cars like SUVs. That means cars becoming bigger, SUVs are in focus, but also the smaller cars like the Volkswagen Up or the Seat Mii or the Skoda Citigo, also these small cars for young people are, let's say, a trend. I really cannot say that the majority of the cars or the percentage is in this or that segment. As you can see, out of the group Volkswagen with 280 different models, of course there are the trucks and the buses included. It's a very wide range where you can choose your model out of it. Yeah. So, and we try as a Volkswagen group, we try to accommodate, hopefully, all the needs of our customers with this wide range of cars where you can choose out of. Yeah, and I think it's also important to look about where, in which country or which region you are selling the cars. Yeah, if you, for example, were looking in the markets like China, where normally everybody is thinking about, okay, the Chinese people like the small cars because there's 1 billion of people living there, more than 1 billion, so they are focused on small cars. This is not the truth. They want to have the big cars because the people there who can afford to buy a car out of an OEM, local production, or even an import car, they are rich and they want to show that they are rich. What it means, our cars which we produce, for example, in our plants in China, most of them have an extended version because the customer who is buying the car is not driving by himself. He has a driver. He's sitting on the rear side. And he needs space and he wants to show. Yeah, and another trend, for example, also in China is because a lot of people, there's a, let's say, a middle class coming up now, and they want to show that they can afford a lot of things, luxury goods, out of their point of view. They also like to play golf. They like to drive SUVs to show the clubs in the luggage compartment. They want to have refrigerators in the car because most of them on the weekends go with the complete family outside for some picnics or some trips. So because of due to the traffic situation, a lot of traffic jams, especially in China. They also want to have their cold drinks with them or the coffees and so on. So let's say the behavior and the requirements of the customers, if you look to China, if you look to India, is completely different. In India, most of the people are driving bicycles or motorcycles. Yeah, and all the OEMs try to get in this segment. Yeah, that the people in the future don't continue to drive a motorcycle. They try to drive an entry car, yeah, local produced. So, but the Indian market, let's say, out of our point of view, is not, let's say, on the way to change so quickly, yeah, because they cannot afford. Most of them they cannot afford. They have other problems. Before they are thinking about buying a new car, they have to survive. Yeah, so you cannot say which trend will be where. It's really depending on the region where you are and also on the culture, in which culture you are. And normally, everybody or each OEM try to accommodate the needs in the designing and the local production or even import of those cars.
Thank you. Michael, anything to add?
Yes, I mean, I think 5 or 10 years ago, everyone assumed that cars would get smaller because of the need to meet CO2 emissions. And the only way to do so was to reduce vehicle weight and vehicle size and increase efficiency. The manufacturers have proved that there isn't necessarily the need to do that. And the CO2 emissions being achieved by your typical C segment or D segment or even E segment car now with either conventional powertrains or some form of hybridization are way in advance of what I think anyone expected 5 years ago even. So that's a major consideration that in Europe we're likely to meet the 21-21 target without massive structural changes, which I think perhaps were expected 5 years ago. In North America as well, the same sort of situation. Although in North America, it's a slightly different one because obviously that's a big car market. Trucks and SUVs dominate that market and cars have lost out through the 1990s and the mid part of the last decade. And we did actually start to see some reversal of that trend and a move to smaller cars within the US as fuel prices spiked. So, as Farag said, I mean, it's a complicated global market and each individual country or region is driven by different things. And certainly, again, in China, The assumption would be it's an emerging market. There are a lot of consumers who don't have a lot of wealth. They would buy the cheaper locally produced vehicles. That's not happening. Premium brands have outperformed the market. Western brands have outperformed the market. The Chinese brands are struggling within their own market and losing market share. So I don't think that we're going to see a big structural change towards small cars. And as Rayak said, one of the biggest structural changes we've seen, certainly in Europe and some other markets, is the growth of SUVs and crossovers. Something perhaps counter to what you would expect given the increasingly tightening emission standards.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Some great start to the conference. So much information was shared on demographics, on trends, on climate change, on practical ideas and solutions, and how the industry can move forward. So I think we certainly picked up a lot of information from that first session. So firstly, thank you to the panel. The next session, we're going to split into three. I think finished vehicle logistics is going to stay here, but further down the corridor, there'll be sessions on the supply chain and globalization and service parts, after sales and service parts. I hope you used and took advantage of the live stream and found some value in that. If you haven't quite logged on, take the opportunity of this break to do that. If you're watching on the live stream, we're now going to the coffee break, and I believe in a few minutes you'll get a knock on your office door that will be delivering the coffee any minute, courtesy of our host, our coffee break host, Jeff Coe. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the first session. Thank you.